What's going on, people? Jeff here. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever it is, whatever time it is. Yeah, we're here for episode 4 of Let's Talk. And off the bat, I'm just going to admit, talking and, playing a game or doing something else at the same time is, well, it's kind of difficult. I'm not going to lie. I recorded part of this episode, and I wasn't satisfied with it because I just, there was too many empty spaces in my talking, right? And I was going off track, and that's mostly due to the fact that I'm trying to play a game, right? If I was talking and not doing anything else, it would be more cohesive. But part of all of this is I'm trying to learn to multitask. So that's why I want to keep the gameplay and the doing other things. So, yeah. Last time I talked about, what do we want? I talked about the basics of Islam, right? What is a Muslim? What is required to be Muslim? What does it mean to be Muslim? Who is Allah? Who is Muhammad, etc. The basics. What is required for a person to be Muslim? We went over that. Alhamdulillah. And I wanted to go into what about the Islamic knowledge was so appealing to me, right? Like, I became Muslim and I learned the basics and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm Muslim, it's great. But then at some point I actually started learning the Islamic knowledge and, like, things really changed. And things really changed for me when I took a book called Al-Waraqat, which is a summary, I guess you could say, of Usul Fiqh, of the Usul of Fiqh, of, you could say, the meta-knowledge of Fiqh. Or, the meta-knowledge works. We don't have to be super clear. And it was amazing. Like, it changed my whole kind of worldview on Islamic knowledge and how it works. So, there is an assumption people have about religion in general, but also in particular about Islam, that I want to kind of address and, debunk, dispel, right? And it's this assumption that in Islam, there's no thinking, right? It's just you follow the word that was revealed, and that's that. There's nothing to it, right? That's not actually the case. Islam and the knowledge, or rather the knowledge of Islam, the field of scholarship in Islam, if you will, is actually, I would say, it is the greatest human endeavor to try to understand this world within the context of how to live in it that has ever been done. Period. Like, bar none. I literally cannot express to you really why that is. Like, it's something you have to learn. I'm going to try to explain it, but it's going to be something that a lot of people are going to hear and they're going to be like, yeah, right. And I can't, there's really nothing I can say to just automatically make you see it. I can try to explain why I think that is the case, and that's the best I can do, right? And so I'm going to try to do that. So, there are several kind of aspects to it, and they're related, but they're not. They're going to be somewhat incohesive because I'm going off the top of my head, and I'm not, again, I don't really prepare. I did record this once and then deleted it because I didn't like it, so I guess in that sense I did prepare, but anyways, basically, the primary reason I think that is because the bulk of Islamic knowledge, and here I'm talking about fiqh. The fiqh is, in short, fiqh is that knowledge which a certain answer is not obvious. Or it is that, you could also say it is that knowledge, or it is that field of study, rather. It is that field of study about things with which there is no certainty about in Islam. So what does that mean? Like, for example, Allah exists. There's no, uncertainty about this. Prophet Muhammad exists. Prophet Muhammad was a prophet. Prophet Muhammad didn't tell lies. What else? Murder is haram. It's a sin to commit murder. These types of things, there's no uncertainty. It is clear. It is clear either mentally or because the Quran or the Hadith explicitly state it. They explicitly state such and such is haram, for example. What am I doing? So fiqh covers those questions and those things for which there is not an explicit answer. Because if there is no explicit answer, then an answer has to be deduced. Somebody has to do some deduction. They have to look at the evidence, the proof, and they have to make a call. What is the judgment in a particular situation? What is, some question, is eating some type of food sinful or not? Well, we have to figure that out, right? Because that type of food may not be mentioned in Quran or in Hadith. So we have to figure it out. And there is a system to figuring that out. And that system involves usul al-fiqh, right? And then the result of that system is fiqh. Yeah. Right? Okay. That's what fiqh is. Now, how can I say it? One of the primary things that made me certain about Islam is that the fiqh, which is the most of the rules and judgments in Islam, the fiqh is deduced by human beings, by men and women. Men and women of any background, of any race, of any color, not of any language, because, you need Arabic to understand the Quran and Hadith. So you have to at least learn Arabic, but you don't have to be an Arab, for example. You have to be Muslim, obviously, so not any religion. But rich, poor, whatever, it doesn't matter. You can become a scholar in Islam, and you can deduce judgments. Right? Now, it's not complete, laissez-faire, do whatever, like there's limits. Of course there's limits. But those limits and the breadth of allowance, the breadth of allowance for opinion is vast. Like there's a lot of room for opinion and disagreements. I mean that's what the scholarship is. It's a lot of people disagreeing on a lot of things, not on core things. There's no disagreement about who Allah is and who Muhammad is and, the aqeedah or the creed. That's the same. It doesn't matter what madhab you are. But, whether something is done properly, like the prayer or, zakat or hajj or whatever, all of this is subject to differences of opinion. So people disagree. But here's the thing. Here's the zinger. That's a mercy. You heard it here, folks. The fact that there are so many disagreements in the madhabs is a mercy. This is a good thing. The fact that I'm walking in a big loop is not a good thing. I need to do something. Quick note. Part of the reason why I don't even know if I explained this in this video or in the one I deleted, but I'm going to do it again anyways. Part of the reason why I'm playing this game is because I'm practicing multitasking. Like, I want to try to do multiple things at once because that is a good skill to have. So that's why I'm doing this. And I'm specifically doing it while trying to talk about critical and serious topics. That's just another part of, what I'm doing here. All right. Anyways. This is a mercy. For several reasons. All right. First of all, it gives Muslims a choice. Do you want to follow this madhab or that madhab, right? The only limitation to that is access to people who can teach you. Right? And, in some cases it can be unwise. Like, you don't want to mix judgments. Like, generally speaking, if you're going to follow, well, not if, you have to follow a madhab. But when you follow a madhab, you generally want to follow just everything for that one madhab. You don't want to mix and match. But, you can pick, right? So if one madhab is easier or has an easier judgment and you can use it, then you use it. Like, there's no issue. There's no shame in that. So the fact that there are multiple schools of thought on the rules of Islam is a mercy from Allah, right? Some people, they can handle a more difficult case or a set of rules, and other people, they can't, right? So there's options. Secondly, it's rather explicitly a mercy because of several facts. One, so I'm going to put people into two groups. I'm going to put Muslims into two groups. Or no, I'm going to put people, whatever. I'm going to put Muslims into two groups. Those who are mujtahids, mujtahid matlaq, I believe is the term, and those who are not. A mujtahid matlaq is somebody who has acquired enough knowledge that they can deduce judgments. But it's not simply that they've acquired enough knowledge that they can deduce judgments. It's they've acquired enough knowledge that they are obligated to deduce judgments. It is not permissible for them to follow what some other scholar said. They have to deduce it themselves. By the way, I'm speaking in generalities. There may be some rare exception or something that's just assume that there might, unless I explicitly say there is no exception, just assume that there might be exceptions, right? Every Muslim has to believe in Allah and the Prophet. There's no exceptions to that. But other things might have exceptions, right? But yes, the mujtahid matlaq has to follow so he has to look at the Quran, he has to look at the hadith, and he has to decide for himself what is haram, what is halal, what is valid, what is invalid, what is rewardable, what is not rewardable, what is sinful, what is, he has to determine that himself. Right? So literally, when a person reaches a certain level of knowledge, they are obligated to think for themselves. And the best path that a person can take in Islam is to become a mujtahid, a top scholar. So not only are people encouraged to learn and to become a top scholar, they're encouraged to reach a position where they become obligated to think for themselves. Right? Within limits, right? They can't, someone who's a mujtahid cannot deny ayats, for example. He cannot say, well, this ayat doesn't work, or, they can't do that. There's still limits. There's still a framework, if you will, that they have to work in. But it's a wide framework. It's like the ocean, right? Like, not all ocean waters are the same, right? So that's the first, group. And I mentioned that this is something Allah explicitly. So the mujtahid matlaq. In the hereafter, they have the possibility of getting two rewards. One, they get the reward for deducing judgments, for doing basically their job. When they give fatwa and they deduce judgments and they, implement them, they follow them, they get a reward for that. They're rewarded for doing their best to try to figure out the uncertain matters. They get a reward for that. Secondly, if their conclusion is the correct one, and we won't know until the day of judgment, right? If their conclusion is the correct one, they get a second reward, right? So if a mujtahid is doing his job, whether the conclusion he comes to is the correct one or not, he still gets reward. And if it happens to be correct, he gets 2 rewards. And that's the first group of people. The second, which is the vast majority of Muslims, they're not mujtahids. If you're not a mujtahid, then you have to follow the methodology, or you have to follow the deductions, the fatwas, if you will, of a mujtahid. And the person who does this, the Muslim who does this, he gets reward. He gets reward for following the opinions of the scholars, of the mujtahids. Even if that mujtahid came to conclusions that on the day of judgment we find out that they weren't the correct ones, the person who followed him still gets reward. Because his job, the job of the person who's not a mujtahid, is to follow. Right? It is his job to follow the opinions of those who have knowledge, who have used their minds to come to the conclusions that they have come to. Right? When you really think about this, especially when you think about it in the context of other kind of belief systems and systems of living and religions and stuff, nothing comes close, right? Somebody might make an argument that pure anarchy comes close, but that has a whole slew of other issues we can get into some other time, right? That's an absurdity, basically. No other belief system comes close to the amount of freedom and the encouragement of using your mind that Islam does. Even furthermore, for the Muslim who is not a mujtahid, even though they're not a mujtahid, there's still times where they still have to use their mind. They have to make ijtihad, right? They have to make a judgment. They have to deduce on their own. For example, determining the qibla, right? They have to deduce this on their own. If they're in a new place, like the prayer time, they have to deduce when is dhuhr coming in. They follow the method of the scholars to figure out when dhuhr comes in. But every day when they want to pray dhuhr, they look at the sky, they look at the creation, and they go, okay, I'm making a judgment. Dhuhr is now in, I will go pray dhuhr. So even your average Muslim has to do some, thinking, as it were. How long have we been recording? 18 minutes? So Islam encourages thinking, right? But it's within limits, right? Because not everything, or rather, the conclusions of the mind are not the final say. For example, wiping the foot, the kuf. Is it kuf? Is it with a kaf or khaf? I don't recall. The leather sock. It's a leather sock that people wear. The mind would say, well, when you wipe the leather sock for wudu, you wipe the bottom because the bottom is the part that's getting dirty. But actually, when you wipe the leather sock for wudu, you wipe the top. And this is like the common example of like, just because something seems to make sense in your mind doesn't mean that, that takes precedence over what the religion says. Because the saying that Islam is about submission is true, right? There are things in Islam that we do that the scholars have deduced that we have to do, even though some conventional, so it might, conventional wisdom might be to do something else. However, nothing contradicts the mind, right? I mean, that's a whole topic in itself. But basically, yeah, Islam encourages thinking. It encourages you to think. It encourages you to use your mind. The best endeavor that a Muslim can have is to work to become a mujtahid. And a mujtahid is somebody who primarily uses their mind. A mujtahid primarily is somebody who uses their mind to figure out the uncertain matters. Let's stop walking in a circle and get a generator put down. So, I mean, that was the first, like, that was really one of the first big, major moments where I realized, oh, wow, Islam has really got it going. One of the other things that really kind of I found quite amazing is the respect for and the care given to knowledge and the transmission of knowledge. Right? So in Islam, knowledge is transmitted primarily, or not primarily, valid knowledge is transmitted through chains of narration called Isnad. And what is a chain of narration? A chain of narration is basically this. Somebody says something. Somebody else hears it. He tells other people. Those people tell other people. Those people tell other people. Those people tell other people. Until it reaches us today. Right? 1,400 years later. Now, it's more than that. And I know what people are going to say. Oh, it's word of mouth. How's that reliable? Blah, blah, blah. No, like calling it word of mouth it is a rather great injustice for several reasons. First of all, memorization. So one of the kind of ideas that people have in society is that memory is terrible. Like, this is like the claim. Oh, memory is terrible. Memory is not terrible. Rather, people who have done those studies have done studies on people who have terrible skills in memory. Because memorization is a skill. It is a skill you develop. It is not an innate thing. You don't have an innate ability to memorize. No, you have a skill to memorize that you have to work at. You have to develop. There are systems you can use to memorize better. Memory is the best store of knowledge for several reasons. All right, let's compare. Let's compare, right? So, memory versus a book. People would argue that a book is better because it doesn't change. The information doesn't change. Once you write it, it's there. The counter to that is that, how can I say? At face value, they have a point. Yes, you write something, it doesn't change. However, memory that is maintained does not change either. This is clear to Muslims because, 500 million people probably have memorized all of the Quran, and no matter where you go in the world, they all memorize the exact same thing. Right? And it word for word, right? Down to even the pronunciation of each letter has been completely memorized. It's completely consistent across, gender, race, location, region, time, age, level of wealth, whatever, kind of social indicators you want to put in there. It's completely and utterly consistent. Right? I can learn a surah, which is a chapter in the Quran. I could go to Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Tatarstan, Morocco, Gambia, Canada, and I can recite that chapter, and everybody in all of those places will agree with me. Even though they've never heard me, they've never met me, I've never met them, they've never met each other, they will all agree. And they won't agree because they're looking in a book and they're going, oh yeah, that's what it said. No, they'll agree because it is also what they have memorized. So that's the first reason why memory is better than books. The second reason is that memory is attached to a human being who can explain. A book cannot explain shit. Pardon my French, but it can't. A book is just information. It cannot give you context. It cannot explain. Even if a book has an explanation, right? Even if a book has an explanation, an explanation is something that is tailored to a specific audience. So one explanation given to one audience is not sufficient. Is not a sufficient explanation to give to another audience. So you have no choice whatsoever but to make mistakes and to misunderstand. There's no choice. It doesn't matter how clear and how precise you think you can write a text in a book and an explanation of that text. How long we've been going? 26 minutes. It doesn't matter how clear of an explanation you think. Somebody is going to misunderstand it. And so the best way to avoid misunderstandings is to use the human brain and its capacity to think to come up with an explanation of the knowledge that is stored, as well as the stored knowledge itself. Right? I mean, it's such a blatantly clear advantage. It is kind of absurd that people would say books are a better medium of storing knowledge than memory. Like, it blows my mind. And I mean, books, any other kind of static medium, tapes, audio, video, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. It's all, if it's not a human being who memorized it, then it's going to be much more susceptible to misunderstanding, right? Because when a person learns, when a person memorizes, if I go to a lesson, I'm going to memorize, and I'm also going to write down, because writing down, I'm not saying don't write stuff down, books help, but they help in service of the memorization. If I go to a class, to a lesson, I'm going to, one, memorize the text, because the way lessons work is that there's a text, and then there's an explanation of the text, in general. So the way, if I go to a class, what's going to happen is, I'm going to write down the text that is being explained, and I'm going to memorize it. But I'm also going to write down the explanation that is being given. And if I'm a really good student, I'm going to memorize that as well. And as I do this, I'm going to, then after I do this, I'm going to go teach it, right? And I'm going to teach the, how do you say? I'm going to teach the text. I'm going to teach the explanation I taught. And then as my student body, as my audience changes, there will be addendums. There will be things added to the explanation to make it clearer, right? And sometimes there are things taken away from the explanation because they don't need to be explained, right? Or it's something that's not relevant, right? And this is something that only a human mind can do, like to be able to determine what part of an explanation is relevant or not. Is it like it requires a human who is thinking who can do that. You cannot put this in a static medium and then just boom, bam, there it is. Especially today, where like, if I was to write something, some explanation for something, especially having to do with like, the way kind of people communicate or do things, in 10 years, that it's going to be difficult for anybody to really understand what was going on. Unless they were, 10 years isn't the best example because people would still be alive and they'd remember it. But, let's say 50 years, right? I'm reminded of the rush. Like, there was a rush, and I think there's some people still alive. Basically, there was a rush to get the stories of people who were in World War II, because everybody who was in World War II is basically gone now. I think there's like, a few people left. Like, it's not a lot. I believe it's less than 100, but I could be wrong in that. And of those, it's like people who were not even directly involved in the combat, I think. So, like, if there hasn't been really a transmission of the knowledge in the system that I've just explained about World War II, in 100 years from now, people are gonna, the baseline ideas about World War II are gonna be inaccurate. Maybe some historians will know. Maybe. Right? Because there's nobody to explain the knowledge and the information of World War II within the what can you say? Within the I was going to say within the context of when it happened, but that doesn't seem like the right thing to say. Yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. You need a person to explain the knowledge. That's the bottom line. And it has to be a person, right? It's anything else would be something which is less capable, right? An AI is not capable. A book is not capable. Books can provide you with past explanations, but that's not. I mean, anybody who studies history should this should be clear. Having somebody who can explain and have that explanation develop, over a period of time, all based on the same explanation, it's invaluable. And no other store or transmission of knowledge even comes close, in my opinion. They don't, right? Not to mention, hold on, how long do we got? Oh, it's 33 minutes. I can go a little bit longer. One of the critical things I left out is that the knowledge cannot be altered. Nobody can come and change it. I got to explain this now, so this video is going to be a little longer. Nobody can come by and change the knowledge, because the knowledge of Islam is decentralized. There's no single governing body. There's no particular country or particular organization. Just because there's an imam in Mecca or Medina doesn't mean that they are the authority on what is and isn't a part of Islam. No, that's not how it works. It's decentralized. Nobody has control, which means nobody can insert things that don't belong. Why? Because 500 million people have memorized the whole Quran. Anybody who comes and says, actually, this ayat says this, everybody, anywhere you go, they're going to be like, no, it doesn't. Because we've all memorized collectively the same text, word for word, syllable for syllable, verse for verse, with the same ways of pronunciation, right? Even in cases where the Prophet recited an ayah in two different ways, Both of those ways are memorized and preserved. Like we know all of that. Nothing new can be added. And this is why the Quran cannot be corrupted in that way. Because the knowledge is completely decentralized. There's no governing body or authority over the Quran in terms of like some group of people maintaining it. Because everybody, everywhere in the Muslim world, most people have memorized it. Like it's very normal, especially in the less modern / less living in comfort societies, right? Children in Africa memorize the whole Quran by the time they're 10. And that's normal. It's normal in Muslim communities, right? To have some people who do that. Like that's not, it's not a weird thing. Memorizing Juz Amma is extremely normal. Juz Amma is the last 30th of the Quran, but it also, people also memorize Fatiha as well, which is the first surah and is recited in the prayer. But anyways, yeah, and it's the same with Hadith. Millions of people have memorized books of Hadith. And they memorize the explanations. And this knowledge is decentralized. Nobody controls it. Right? No. What that means is if I want to learn, nobody can hide any knowledge from me. Unless it's like, not very relevant, extremely rare. But then it doesn't really matter, right? Like bits of knowledge can be lost. Right? Just because there used to be hundreds of mujtahids, now there's, not hundreds of them, right? And there have been schools of thought that have been lost. But there have been schools of thought that have maintained, right? The school of Ash-Shafi'i is the biggest madhab, I believe, in the world, and millions of people have memorized different parts of it. Some people have even memorized likely all of the school of Ash-Shafi'i. And again, I keep saying it, buzzword, decentralized. Nobody can introduce something that's not part of it because everybody who has knowledge will immediately recognize that it's not part of it. Right? But also, nobody can withhold knowledge, right? If I go to a teacher and he doesn't want to teach me something, fine, I'll go to another teacher. Or another teacher, or another teacher, or another teacher, or another teacher. Like, any kind of text I want to learn, there's going to be some other teacher who has learned it. So knowledge cannot be kept from me. And I wouldn't anyways, but knowledge cannot be kept from a person, and a person cannot introduce or cannot introduce new knowledge that came out of nowhere, or alter knowledge, right? People try. That's where sects come from. S-E-C-T-S, sects. That is where they come from. They come along, they try to introduce stuff, and then everybody blasts them for it. Sometimes quite literally blasts them for it. This is why we know that the Mu'tazila were not good folks. Right? This is why we know the, other groups. I'm not going to go naming names, but this is why we know about deviant groups and why it's clear when a deviant group comes along. The Muslims are not, it's Muslims with knowledge are not confused about who's deviant and who isn't. It's crystal clear. Because once a deviant idea comes in, everybody immediately recognizes it and calls it out. And to me, that's an amazing aspect of Islam. Anyways, we are, 39 minutes, 40 minutes. All right, I gotta go. It's been nice chatting with you. You know what I mean? And, yeah, I guess that's Jeff out.